Hello again, sociologists. It's time for community lesson 9. Almost there. I only got 12 for this, and there's no case study this year because of coronavirus. Okay, some learning goals. You're going to know what economic change looks like. And you're going to know how economic change can affect a community. That's the topic, remember? And you're going to be able to respond to a text representation. Oh yes, today's homework is to do a practice representation response of a text. Let's get into it. So the effects of economic change on communities. So when I say economic change, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the change in costs. So there's a little thing called inflation, which means that prices slowly go up over time. Australia's inflation isn't too bad at the moment, about 2%, which means on average things go up 2% in price every year. As long as your wages are going up as well, that's not a problem. If wages aren't going up as quickly as costs, then you become poorer. If wages are going up more than costs, then the average person becomes richer. So we've seen, for example, in Australia over the last sort of 5-10 years, we've seen quite a large increase in housing costs and education costs. So the inflation rate, we say 2%, that's determined by the Treasury looks at what's called a basket of typical goods. So it looks at like typical goods that the average family might buy in a week or whatever, or a month. And then they look at the prices of that and compare it from one year to the next. However, not everybody buys the exact same thing, so some people are affected by price increases more than others. And one example of that is education. For those of you who are at an independent or private school, the increase in fees is much higher than 2% per year. It's more like 10, 15%. And in some cases, even more than that. Anyway. Change in government funding for communities. So government funding could go up or it could go down, or it might increase but not in line with population. So per person the funding is less. Economic change isn't always negative, but anyway. Interest rates. So interest rates are, if you put money in a savings account, how much interest do you get back? Yeah. So at the moment, interest rates are very, very low. So that also means, so interest rates are on debt and on savings. So if the interest rates are low, that means that the interest rates, that mortgage rates aren't very high either. It would take me too long to explain much more about interest rates, but basically just interest rates, if they're high, that means that you get lots of return on savings, but debt repayments are higher. If interest rates are low, as they are at the moment, then you don't get much return on savings in normal bank accounts, but your mortgage repayments on a house will be lower as well. Income, obviously, incomes can go up, they can go down. In Australia, there has been fairly widespread income stagnation for 5-10 years, meaning that wages haven't increased that much for a while. Profits for business owners have increased, but profits for wage earners, so your typical worker, haven't really gone up that much. And so we are starting to see a bit of a squeeze in terms of living costs, although Australia is still a fairly wealthy country. So anyway. Tax. So governments can increase taxes, reduce taxes. We live in a country that has a progressive tax system, which means that the more you earn, the higher percentage of your income you pay in tax. There's a couple of reasons for that. Well, the main reason for it is that there's what's known as the diminishing marginal utility of money, which means that the more money you have, the less a little bit extra is going to make a difference to your life. Yeah, there's been a lot of well-being research done around the world that suggests that anything above about $70,000 per year, which is about 100 grand Australian, so anything for a household, if you earn Now, up to $100,000, that's going to have a big impact on your well-being. If you earn much more than $100,000, yeah, you're going to have a swanky yacht and you're going to go on lots of international holidays, but does it make that much of a difference to your well-being? Not really. So the tax system tries to even out the income inequality between people. People who don't have a job because they're unemployed, and remember, unemployment is generally not because people don't want to work, it's because there are not jobs for them, or they're not skilled enough to get the jobs that are out there. Trying to even out the people who have no jobs versus people who are making crazy millions of dollars, yeah? So take a bit of money off them, give some of it to them, and then also use that tax money to pay for public services, roads, police, the army, cops, nurses, teachers, all kinds of stuff. In Australia, you don't pay any tax if you earn about $18,000 or less. So for those of you that have got part-time work as students, you're probably not paying any tax. And there's different rates. I think there's about 4 different bands. The top rate, I believe, is about 38%. Tax rates, income tax rates, have come down massively in the since about 1980 in Western countries. Yeah, the top tax rate used to be about 90%. In Anglo countries, that's Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the US, the tax rates are a bit lower than they are in like Scandinavian countries. In Sweden, for example, they've just got a flat tax rate of 50%. But for that flat rate tax rate of 50%, university's free. All the schools and hospitals are at the level of, get the funding level of what private hospitals and private schools get over here. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't. The costs of financial management could be different. And economic changes has huge effects on how goods are produced, how they're distributed, how they're exchanged, how they're consumed. You know, and I think there's a little video at the end of this, video called "What is Economics?" Because to be honest, economics in political science, we would say it's the science of the possible, right? So if you don't have an economic plan, if you're in leadership, then you can't get stuff done. Yeah, money is what you need to achieve policy goals. So if you don't have a firm understanding of economics, it's really important to understand public life, to have a basic understanding of economics. I strongly recommend that you try to get your head around macroeconomics, what goes on at the macro, the big top government level, and microeconomics, so what individual businesses and households choose to do. It's a really, really, really important subject, even if it's a bit boring sometimes. Obviously, unemployment has a big economic effect on communities. And lastly, the loss of a whole industry. So due to the global pandemic, we're going to see some huge economic changes in Australia and worldwide. The industries that are most badly affected are those that depend on export and income, so exports and imports. So, for example, the tourism industry is really, really struggling at the moment. Some of the service sector is really struggling with, cafes, bars, restaurants having to be closed for 2 months. Australia has recently seen an entire industry shut down. The car industry, Australia used to make cars, but they don't anymore. They're all economic changes and they have massive effects on communities. And you probably know of people in your social network who have been negatively affected by the changes from the pandemic. Random picture. So the tunnel's about economic transformation. Go in with a crappy old steamship, you come out with a Shinkansen, or whatever they're called in China. I went on a Shinkansen in Japan, it went 450k an hour. Nice. Anyway. Here's a little random thing from the World Bank Group about economic transformation. So how do we transform economies? We increase productivity. A lot of that's come from improving agriculture. We move from rural to urban regions. That's happened massively. That was one of the big things that started the Industrial Revolution, and it's still continuing today. Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world. Changed sectors and occupations. So the service sector is getting much bigger, and a transition to wage jobs, whatever that means. Yeah. So, economic changes on communities. Some communities are wealthy and some are not so wealthy. Wealthier communities have more power. For individuals, poverty increases stress and reduces health. Being poor does negatively affect your physical and mental health big time. If any of you have lived through poverty, you'll know what I'm talking about. For communities, poverty could result in the loss of facilities and programs, and as communities lose government funding, as they lose facilities, as they lose programs, people move away, which means they get less funding, and you get this cycle, and that's where you see entire communities going down the gurgler. Some more random images here, so you're not just listening to me talk about my own notes. So the wealth effect. Wealth has a big effect. It increases your confidence, makes you more willing to spend because you know that you're going to get more money. You're more likely to take out loans. And yeah. These are the negative effects that happen from poverty, from birth all the way to death. And this slide's a little bit depressing. So poor kids have adverse childhood experiences. Perhaps they don't get enough food for nutrition, which impairs them cognitively. Then they have worse health as adults. They're more likely to have disease, disability, and social problems. And poor people will die earlier. So get well educated and you're less likely to have these problems. These are not notes you need to take down. This is just like a little summary about poverty. So there's two types of poverty. And if you remember back to year 10 geography, which I'm sure none of you do, we talked about absolute poverty, which is where there's an actual number where you below that number you're considered to be in absolute poverty. The standard worldwide at the moment is living on less than $2 a day. The number can be higher or lower, but like if you're living on less than $2 a day, you are definitely in absolute poverty. And relative poverty is just comparing you to the average poverty in your country. So people in Australia can be considered poor, but not by world standards. They're probably not poor, but maybe by Australian standards they are poor. And that's when you're in relative poverty. If I think relative poverty in Australia, don't quote me on this, but it's something like if you are on less than half the minimum wage, you're considered to be in poverty in Australia. Why is there poverty? A lot of it is to do with being born into poverty, unemployment, lack of education, all that stuff. What are the effects of poverty? Heaps of them, as mentioned. And who are the groups that are at risk from poverty? Obviously the unemployed, low paid, single parents, all those people. Yeah. So, continuing on here, we're going to do a look at a little mini case study here, the loss of a local footy team, yeah? I'm not the world's biggest fan of AFL, but after reading this sad little story, I'm a bit more pro AFL. So remember, you're going to do well if you can draw on all of the examiner's reports for the last few years, all mention having a broad range of evidence. Okay, so if you want to talk about evidence of economic change on communities, this little mini case study would be a really good one. Okay, so they reckon this research found that the worst thing that can happen to a small town is the loss of a local football team. Worse than losing a school, worse than losing a bank, worse than losing a post office. Very surprising. So there's a lot of community organisations out there, but they're not as good at helping small communities. For example, churches don't usually reach the young these days. Most of the people that go to church are elderly. Schools, government and police often only see youth from a position of authority. So in particular, young men who, if they don't have anything productive to do, can do things that are not great. Footy teams can really help access those people, yeah. So football teams promote networking, people get employment through them. They reach at-risk young males, and it promotes a lifestyle of fitness and achievement. The article about this in the textbook talks all about the fact that your social networks are massively broadened by being a part of a local football team, and you can get work by knowing people who've got businesses, blah, 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 blah. So there you go, mini case study. There's even a little bit of academic research on this. This looks at competitive sport and social capital in rural Australia. Here we go. Sport acts as a vehicle for creation and expression of social capital. So sport creates social capital. It creates those positive social networks. There you go. So here we've got right, so the activity for today, I want you to go there, bit.ly/AFL questions. So you'll need to write down these questions, go to that, or maybe you've got two devices, whatever. Anyway, read that and then answer these. Do a real short response questions, just in your textbook. What are the 4 measures of vigor? What makes clubs so powerful in the community? That AFL questions thing is just me putting a screenshot of a page from the textbook on Imgur online. So if you can find that in the textbook, then you don't need to go there. You can just find it in your textbook. I can't remember what page it is. So what are the 4 measures of vigor? What makes clubs so powerful in the community? How could a rural footy club be exclusionary? They are the 3 questions. So that's really interpretation questions, yeah? Showing that you can understand something in a representation. Joyce. Right, here's a video. What is economics? A real quick summary of the entire academic field. You need to know it.
What is economics? The typical first-year student walks into his first economics class with very little idea of what economics is. He might have heard something like, economics is the study of money, or economics is another word for accounting, or economics is hard, don't take that class. But none of those are true. Economics is the study of the use of scarce resources that have alternative uses. That's the classic definition of economics. Basically, there are people, and people need resources to fulfill their desires. These resources cannot be infinite, but the desires can be, so people need to make choices about how to use their scarce resources. Economists study these choices. All economic questions fall into one of 2 categories, positive and normative. Positive economics describes what is, and normative economics argues for what ought to be. So a question like, why do people use money? Is a positive question, and should people use money is a normative question. A general rule of thumb is that if your economic model has no value judgments, it's positive economics. Whereas if it does have value judgments, it's normative economics, since to tell someone what he ought to do, you first have to judge what is best for him. Economics is also divided into microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics studies the behavior of individual agents and markets, while macroeconomics studies the behavior of the entire economy. Economists also have their own branch of statistics called econometrics. that specialize to analyzing economic data. Since economic data usually comes from the real world and not from controlled experiments, econometrics faces mathematical challenges that other fields might not. The tools economists have developed to study human behavior have broad uses outside of what we would traditionally consider economics. Economists study not only markets, but things like crime, war, the family, religion, culture, politics, law, and even genetics. That's why it's not unusual to see papers by psychologists, sociologists, criminologists, political scientists, anthropologists, biologists, neuroscientists, or legal scholars being co-authored by economists.
Here's another video. It's a TED Talk. It's called Digital Transformation. Are you ready for exponential change? It's by futurist Gerd Leonard. Being a futurist would be a cool job.
Once upon a time, business as usual was often good enough. No more. Where we are going, good enough is dead. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it? Disruption has become the new normal. With change, it's always gradually, then suddenly, well, things really have stopped happening gradually. This change is exponential. Everything that used to be dumb and disconnected is now wired and intelligent. Cars, cities, ports, farms, even our bodies will be wired with sensors and will talk to each other. These game changers are also combinatorial. They amplify each other, creating a perfect storm of change. Quantum computing fuels big data. The Internet of Things fuels artificial intelligence and deep learning, which fuels robotics. However, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will become extremely valuable. Human-only traits such as creativity, imagination, intuition, emotion, and ethics will be even more important in the future, because machines are very good at simulating, but not at being. Yes, robots and software will do some of our work, but this will allow us to focus on things that cannot be automated. To imagine change squared, you've got to start engaging more with what might be, not just with what is. Immerse yourself in the immediate future, 5 to 7 years out from today. We need to go beyond technology and data to reach human insights and wisdom. Technology represents the how of change, but humans represent the why. The future is about holistic business model. The opportunity is to be liquid, to learn just in time, not just in case, not single improvements, but complete transformations, not individual systems, but new ecosystems. Humanity is where true and lasting value is created. We will engage, relate, and buy things because of the experiences they provide, because of their transformative power. The future doesn't just happen, the future gets happened. The new way to work is to embrace technology, but not to become it. The future is in technology, yet the bigger future lies in transcending it. Let's live and lead from here.
Sorry, I'm slugging you with 3 videos today. This one's called The New Economy.
Businesses have always been focused on increasing efficiency. The Industrial Revolution meant that production could take place on an enormous scale. The Model T car was produced by the thousands, distributed to a dealership near you. This was a great time for America. While fixed costs for creating cars were expensive, the additional variable cost per car was cheap. Optimal production occurs when the marginal revenue gained from selling an additional car equals the marginal costs of production. Recent trends have added some confusion to the old formulas. What happens when the marginal cost approaches zero? We predict this will unlock tremendous efficiency and create more opportunities for everyone. But how does this happen exactly? Enter the digital revolution. Advancing technology in transportation and telecommunications meant production could occur wherever labor was cheapest. Outsourcing jobs was just the beginning. Automation and computer software have replaced jobs typically thought of as human. Furthermore, increased access to information means that consumers can bypass traditional marketplaces. These forces have started to reduce the marginal costs in many industries to near zero, meaning many goods and services are becoming nearly free. This means we're continuing to see increased efficiency. Individuals are networking with each other and decentralizing the old model of distribution. Examining industry at large, we notice a few trends. The marketplace is becoming hyper-competitive. Technology has begun evening the playing field between corporations and individuals. The ability to quickly respond to changes becomes paramount. Here, individuals race past encumbered corporations. The titans of industry may still exist, but their growth is fueled by consuming smaller, nimble startups. New means of unlocking efficiency are continually being found. Large cities around the U.S. have started to experience a sharing economy, where idle items can be easily rented between individuals. Increased collaboration is starting to fulfill economists' theories of perfect competition. This is the opposite of a monopoly. Here, consumers have the power. What will success look like in the future? For one, businesses will need to build trust with consumers. They need to show they are sincerely trying to help consumers to the best of their ability. This is the heart of conscious capitalism. Second, businesses will need to keep up with the pace of innovation. This may mean some jobs are phased out in the short term, but new kinds of jobs will continue to pop up in the future. What will this future look like for our economy? Will all these changes result in some intergalactic utopia 200 years down the road? Or will they be so disruptive that our economy collapses and drags civilization into a chaotic resurgence of the Dark Ages, juiced up on nuclear steroids? Only time will tell.
Reflection activity for today, it's a PMI. I want you to give me 1+ from what you've learned today about economic change on communities and the little mini case study we looked at, 1-, and one thing that's interesting. And I really hope there is at least one thing that was interesting. It's the fun times, it's the homework times. I want you to read those 2 pages from your textbook, and I want you to write a poem. A 4-line poem about economic change, and make it rhyme if you can. That should be fun. Thank you so much for getting stuck into this lesson. As always, keep it real.